ditch that we have, that our imports in goods, I think, or exports in goods are 11 million with Israel. So it's really important that we make strides in the BDS movement. And the Occupied Territories Bill looks like it's going to be stripped of services. So we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to BDS. So I won't delay any further. I'm going to introduce Jamie and let him talk us through this information today. So thank you for joining us again.
Thank you very much. I'll start by apologising about the quality of this. Everybody should have a physical handout in front of them. It's the same content, it just looks a bit different. So if there's anything you can't see, just refer to the sheet in front of you. And everybody online should just be seeing my screen, so there should be no issues there. To introduce myself, Jamie Murphy is my name. I'm the General Secretary of the Independent Workers Union. We are a trade union with our headquarters in Cork. And we are, on the face of it, quite a new union. We were founded in 2002, but we actually have very deep roots in Cork and in the trade union movement as a whole. We have our roots in the Cork Operative Butchers Society, which was founded in 1916, and we've been in this building since 1936, so we've been here quite a while. So that was just some information about ourselves. We're the only general trade union that's outside of the Irish Council of Trade Unions. What that means in practice, because I know not a lot of people know in practice what that means, is we basically don't have to answer to anybody except our members. And that is very important when it comes to industrial action. Right? And I'll touch on that quite heavily throughout the course of this. Okay, so one moment there now. What we will be focusing on today, right? I've broken it down quite succinctly. The information that I'm telling you might seem fairly simple and straightforward, and that's because it is. And I want to really hammer home today that it's actually quite straightforward and simple to take industrial action. The hard part is in the boots on the ground work of organising your colleagues, right? Before I start, does anybody know how to organise a strike?
No.
Okay. Has anybody been part of a strike before? Or any form of industrial action?
No.
That's good. So we'll look over what the Industrial Relations Act is, right? Specifically the 1990 Act. What the industrial landscape was like before this act was introduced and what it's like now. Something we have to focus on quite heavily is what a trade dispute is, because that's quite a technical term that's used in the Act and that is used in order to engage in industrial action. I'll then go through in a bit of detail how to engage in industrial action according to the Act, how an employer can respond, and then how the workers can respond to the employer. And then obviously focus in on what we're here today to discuss, which is how to engage in industrial action, specifically regarding the handling of Israeli goods, and what that can look like in practice. And I'll give a bit of a case study example of that. And then hopefully I'll speak maybe 20, 30 minutes, and we'll open it up then for discussion. And hopefully that can be where the fruit of today lies. Okay, so the Industrial Relations Act 1990 is thrown around a lot in industrial circles. And it's actually quite a simple piece of legislation, right? It was brought in essentially to formulate how industrial action can take place. In other words, it specifically states what makes industrial action and strikes legal now. Before this piece of legislation was introduced, there was no such formulaic legislation in place to criterialize what makes industrial action legal and what it doesn't. So in practice, what this means is solidarity strikes and political strikes were made illegal overnight. What solidarity strikes are, to give an example, is in Cork. Like I said, we're heavily, our roots are based in the butchers branch. And most butchers in Cork would have been members of the Cork Operative Butchers Society. What that meant in practice is that a worker getting messed around in one place of employment, in one butcher shop, impacted everybody else. And because everybody was in the same organization, if one butcher was getting messed around, everybody else in all the other butcher shops would drop tools as well. And that would be known today in today's terms as a solidarity strike, right? So, in other words, where the trade dispute doesn't impact you yourself or you're in your own shop, it would impact somebody else in a different shop of your own sector. They are now illegal, strictly speaking, right? And then political strikes, like general strikes, striking for a specific political purpose, they were also made illegal overnight. So the Industrial Relations Act 1990, what it does is it formulates specifically how a group of workers can take industrial action with their specific employer and the boxes that they have to take in order to do so. Right? Hope that makes sense. It also protects workers from something known as tort. Anybody know what that means? Tort is to put your hand on. What does it mean?
Tort is basically a civil wrong. It's something that if someone were to do to you, you could sue them for whatever reason.
Exactly. So it's basically if financial damages were done to you, you could litigate against them, right? Now, what that looks like again in practice is if industrial action has gone about the incorrect way, then your employer could potentially take you to court for tort, right? For damages that they would have sustained while you were engaging in industrial action, right? If you follow the act correctly, this can't happen. Strictly speaking, anyway. As I said, before this legislation, engaging in industrial action was a lot easier, right? The notion of dropping tools on the spot and ceasing work when a wrong has been committed against you is something that effectively can't happen now, right? In order for industrial action to take place, your employer has to be given notice, and I'll touch on that later on. So on-the-spot strikes were phased out, and likewise, solidarity strikes and political strikes were phased out. That isn't to say, though, and this is something that the Irish Congress of Trade Unions has sort of hammed up quite a lot, is that it's very difficult now to engage in industrial action, which actually isn't the case. It's still relatively simple. It's just that you have to follow some extra steps, right? Okay. Something that we need to touch on before we get into the meat of the issue is to focus on this concept of the trade dispute, right? In order to engage in industrial action, a trade dispute between a group of workers and their employer has to exist, right? Now, it's important that I mention the fact that I say it's a group of workers, not a singular worker, right? In order to be covered under the Act to engage in industrial action, it has to be collective, right? A singular person can't do this. I'll touch on that more in a moment. What a trade dispute is it's a formal disagreement, basically between a group of workers, however many they are, more than two, and their employer, right, about some element of the worker's conditions of employment, right? This can range from anything very serious to something that we might classify as quite trivial, right? So the serious examples here would be your pay, right? Your breaks, whether you're getting breaks, your annual leave, or bullying, right? And then something that we might class as quite trivial would be if, let's say, the kitchen facilities aren't up to snuff, the microwave is broken, right? Or the toilets are broken, or something that isn't necessarily something wrong with your contracted employment, but it's something that is wrong with your everyday conditions and how you work, right? Also, an example would be the fact that you're handling Israeli goods, right? That would be an example of something that is wrong in what you were doing in your day to day. Yeah. In order for this disagreement to be formulated into a trade dispute, right, it has to be collective. So what a collective means, according to the Act, by the way, is just two or more workers, right? So in other words, more than one. In order for the trade dispute to come about, and again, I'll touch on this in a moment, you have to approach your employer with this issue that you're having, right? You can't just state that this trade dispute has occurred. So in other words, if it's the case that you're not getting your adequate breaks, your colleagues aren't getting your adequate breaks, you have to formalize this to your employer. when they inevitably tell you to fuck off, or when they inevitably don't listen to you, right? The trade dispute is then a receipt. Because it's a disagreement between you and your colleagues, right? The workers and your employer. This making sense? All good? Okay. Now, in a slide, I think I've put down, not I think, I have put down all the criteria you need to fulfill in order to engage in industrial action. First thing, trade dispute has to exist between a group of workers and their employer. I've already said that. The second thing, and this is very important, all of the workers in that group have to be a member of the trade union, right? So in order for efficient industrial action to occur, all of those workers have to be a member of the trade union, right? The workers agree after this trade dispute has arisen and they want to engage in industrial action. They have to agree among themselves to hold what's known as a secret ballot, right? A secret ballot is exactly like voting, where you are given a sheet by your trade union that says, do you wish to engage in industrial action in order to resolve X trade dispute, whatever that is, yes or no. You tick the box, you don't leave any indication that it's you who did it, or so makes it secret, you give it back to your union official, right? Much like voting. If the majority of the vote is in favour of industrial action, it goes ahead. If it's not, it doesn't go ahead, right? It's then on the trade union, right, to give the employer notice. Specifically in the Act, you have to give them 7 days notice, right, of when the industrial action will start. You don't have to tell them what the industrial action will be, and you don't have to tell them how long it will go on for. So, for example, you don't have to tell them that the industrial action will be going on for a month, and you don't have to tell them that it will be a strike, or that it will be that you will not be handling Israeli goods, or that it will be whatever, right? If all of this is done correctly, you are technically speaking covered under the Act. Okay. Now, I want to clarify here as well that just because you're covered legally here and that you've done everything correctly, that does not mean that your employer will play by the rules. That does not mean that if everything is done correctly, your employer will be hands off and say, well, look, because you've done everything correctly, we're going to play by the rules. It is absolutely the case, or possible, that you could be disciplined or dismissed or whatever by your employer for this, right? And even though that is illegal, which is again something we'll touch on in a second, some employers decide to take the risk and to pay out the monetary fine rather than deal with the issue at hand, right? So this is where industrial muscle comes in and the strength of having more numbers on your side.
Just wait a sec. I think people are having a bit of difficulty
Hearing me?
hearing you. Yeah.
Sorry.
Is this my yeah.
Okay. I'm always told to quiet down, not speak up.
How's that, everyone? Can you hear better?
Can you hear me now? Let's see. 1, 2.
Yes, I can hear perfectly.
Good. Okay. We will continue.
Yeah, dead on, no problem at all. Yep.
Okay, keep going. So, okay, actually, I'll pause here for a second. Is everything I'm saying so far making sense?
Yes.
Oh, people online?
This all clear enough? I can't see comments, by the way, so
Yeah.
if there's any comments, you'll have to read
Any comments?
Yeah, no problem. Yep.
Yes.
Part of the training.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you repeat her question?
Yeah. So I was asked there if you absolutely have to be part of a trade union or you're not covered, and that's correct.
How does one go about becoming a member?
Of a trade union, when you get in contact with them and you ask to join. So for example, with ourselves, we would not have as much traditional, let's say, red tape or bureaucracy behind engaging in industrial action, right? We would be regarded as somewhat of a militant trade union in the sense that we're all foreign workers engaging in industrial action. How you would join is you would go to union.ie/join and you'd sign up there. I would recommend normally if you're in a workplace and you know that your colleagues are in a certain trade union, the majority of them, it's normally a good idea to stick with that trade union, even if it isn't the best. unless your colleagues are all willing to move over to a union that you regard as better. The reason I say that is because if there's a long-standing tradition of that union in the workplace and there's more people in it, it makes sense that it would be more likely that some form of industrial dispute will take place, right? Rather than having smatterings of all different union density. Yeah. Okay. So let's say you and your colleagues have done all of this. You have engaged in the process. You've engaged your trade union. The secret ballot has taken place. It's been passed, and you're now going to engage in industrial action. And let's say, just for the sake at the moment, that industrial action is a strike, right? So you're all refusing to work for, let's say, a week, 5 days, right? Monday to Friday. And your employer has been made aware of this. You are all technically covered under the Act now. So what can your employer do in this regard? Well, depending on the size of the employer, in the sense that how many employees they have and how much financial resources they have, and the disposition of the employer in the sense of how willing they are to engage with you as a group of workers. Obviously, their answer and how they deal with the group of workers will change, right? What they can do is they can just ignore you, right? Ignore the workers. But normally, if
Yeah.
Normally, if the industrial action is disruptive, and nearly all industrial action is, it has to be by its very nature, right? You're trying to prove a point to your employer to disrupt their business. This can only last so long, them ignoring you, right? If it's disruptive enough, and by that what I mean is, if the industrial action is, let's say, a strike, and let's say there's a good number of you, so production is properly halted in whatever place of employment you're in, the employer will probably want this to stop as soon as possible, and they might not want to cross the fence and actually talk to me, right? A lot of them want to dig their heels in, and a lot of them are, a lot of them would be quite stubborn. So what they can do, and what some of them do, is they go to the courts and they try to apply for what's called an injunction. Specifically, what they would apply for is what's called an ex parte injunction, which just means one party. And what that literally means is the employer, whoever their representative is, goes to normally a district or circuit court and asks for an injunction to be put in place on this industrial action until it can be heard more fully with more evidence. And then both sides would have to present a case. Now, I want to speak about this for a second because there might be a bit of confusion about this as well. If this happens, and it has happened with ourselves, and it has happened with plenty of other disputes, if a judge grants an ex parte injunction, what that means is, strictly speaking, the industrial action has to cease at that point until it's heard again by the judge at a future date. That can take months, if not years sometimes, right? Where the worker's side and the employer's side has to make a case in front of the judge. And normally it's to do with the secret ballot. And it's normally to do with how the union or the workers didn't comply with the Act 100%, right? If it's the case that the judge finds against you, and it's been the case that a judge has found against unions even if they've complied with the Act, they can grant what's known as an interlocutory injunction, which means that that industrial action cannot take place. Full stop. Right? Now, it's very important to note that that injunction is for the ballot. Right? So a way around that, and I'll get to this in the next slide, is just ballot again and go again. Right? So you don't have to wait this about for months or years waiting for a judge to hear this case. You can just go again. Right? What else the employer can do? They can obviously engage with the workers, right? That's the end goal. That's what you want. That's what a group of workers want, right? You want your employer to come to the table with you, talk to you, and put in place your demands. We've had cases in the past where they might try and bring you to the side, you specifically, the individual worker, and threaten you with legal action, right? When we were representing the Iceland workers in 2023, the owner of that company, Naeem Maniar, he landed our shop steward with a high court summons, right, for tort, right, for damages against the company. He also landed me and the national organizer, Alex Hammonds, with high court summons as well. And what did we do? We gave him to our solicitor and nothing came. Right? It was a threat. It was an empty gesture that most people, to be fair, when they see a court document handed to them, would back down because it's scary, right? But if you know what you're doing and you have a good militant trade union behind you, what you do is you get those high court summons and you give them to your union rep. Hello, come on in. Oh,
I'm going to head up. Sorry, could you lock up?
Godspeed. Good luck. One moment there now. But yeah, to finalize what I was saying there, if that does happen, and your employer is particularly egregious and cowboyish in nature, they might try and land you with some form of summons, you specifically, right? And this is a very effective tactic at dividing the workers and making them shit scared, right? But if you have a powerful union behind you, and if you have good solidarity with your colleagues, what you do is you ignore it. You hand it to your trade union rep and you carry on with your industrial action. That's the way to go about it. And this is kind of what I just said. What you do is you stay strong again, right? While obviously, you yourself as a worker, you are an individual. The only way any kind of change whatsoever will take place in your workplace is when you stick together, right? Is when you have that solidarity with your colleagues, and you know that, look, if you don't back down, I won't back down. And let the union deal with all of that legal shite, right? If any of that divide and conquer strategy starts, and it inevitably will, what you do is you give all of that to your union rep, right? And they will have the expertise, at least they hopefully should have the expertise to deal with that. On the independent workers union, I can guarantee you we have the expertise to do that. Likewise, right, if an injunction is granted by a judge, the ex parte injunction, and it seems, at least over the last number of years that I've seen, 8, 9 times out of 10 they are granted by the judge, right? Because, like I said, it's one-sided. The employer is pleading their case. You just ballot again, right? You just go again. Your union official will get in contact with you, and they'll engage the ballot structure. The most delay that would the most how do I say it? The longest delay that you might see would be potentially 2 to 3 weeks in a cease of industrial action to a starting again, right? And if you keep that anger, and if you keep that commitment to the dispute that you and your colleagues have, your employer, again, it depends on the size of them, they're not going to want to go to the courts every couple of weeks to apply for injunctions, because that costs money, because solicitors and barristers are cheap, right? Now, if we're talking, if we're talking Apple or Microsoft, money isn't an object of these companies, right? So the strategy might have to change there a bit. But if you're talking most small to middle-sized companies, just going at it and keep going at it is enough a lot of the time to wear them down, to have them accept, or at the very least come to the table and talk to you about the trade dispute that you have. Okay. Again, all of this making sense?
Yeah, about the injunction, I mean, if it concerns a secret ballot, how can they possibly prove that something was amiss with it?
So normally that has to do with, like...
Can you repeat the question just for people?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So the question was, if the injunction is about the secret ballot and how that's conducted, how is there any way to prove that something was done wrong or even done correctly with it? And that's a good question. And I think where the employer would hope that you slip up is in keeping the records of the secret ballot. So, in other words, if the union official got the secret ballot and it showed, yes, the workers are in favour, and then they bid them, they'd have no record of the secret ballot. So that would be a good thing, right? So obviously you need to keep track of it. This is something that the workers wouldn't really need to keep, or the workers on the floor wouldn't need to worry about. Because if your union official is doing their job, excuse me, they're keeping them they're keeping them safe. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So obviously what we're here today about then, right? This is quite a brief, but I think simple way of looking at how you can turn handling Israeli goods into a trade dispute, right? And how you and your colleagues can protect yourself and legally engage in industrial action about this specific issue, right? Now, in order for this to take place, remember, you all have to be members of a trade union, and a trade dispute has to arise. So it cannot be the case that you and your colleagues just decide we're not going to handle Israeli goods and then just do that, because the employer could come after you for it, right? In order to do it correctly, what needs to be done is the trade dispute needs to arise. So how this would look in practice is you and a group of, let's say, 20 or 30 of your colleagues, you're all a member of the union, right? What you do is you collectively sign a collective grievance, let's say, right? Which explicitly states that you want your terms and conditions of employment to reflect the fact that you do not want to handle Israeli goods and that you have a choice in that matter, right? And you would all collectively sign this. And then normally one or two of you would be elected as the shop stewards or representatives for your colleagues, and you would hand this to management, right? And you'd probably email it to them as well for like a record. You would hand it to them. And then what would more than likely happen, again, not 100% of the time, but let's say 95% of the time, your employer will either ignore you, they will tell you to fuck off, or they will investigate it. And what that means is they will try to individually pick you up and wear you down, right? And then after, let's say, 6 weeks, they might say, actually, there's nothing to answer here. You do have to continue handling Israeli goods. In any of those circumstances, basically in any circumstance where the employer doesn't agree with you and acquiesce to your request, right, to say, yeah, no bother, we will update that, or we will implement this change to your terms and conditions of employment, a trade dispute is then arisen. Right? Does that make sense? That's how you would create the trade dispute.
Can you just say the steps again? So
Yeah.
just very briefly, like.
Yeah. So you and your colleagues would all have to be a member of a union. Let's just say, for argument's sake, you're all members of the IW here, Independent Workers Union, right? You would then collectively write up a grievance that you have, which specifically states that you want your terms and conditions of employment, be that your contract or the employee handbook, you want that changed to state that you and your colleagues do not have to handle Israeli goods if you do not want to. Nice and simple, 1 or 2 sentence addition to your terms and conditions, right? You would then hand this to your employer. It would be 1 or 2 of you would be you would elect a representative amongst yourselves who would go and hand this to your employer. Then your employer will most likely either ignore you or just disagree with it and say, no, we're not doing this, right? At that moment, when you get that response, the trade dispute has arisen, right? And when that trade dispute has then arisen, you can then take industrial action about that, right? Because it is you, the group of workers, and you have your formal disagreement with your employers. The disagreement is about handling Israeli goods. Yeah.
Do you need to specify why in the letter? Or is it just that that's what you want added?
So to repeat the question, it was in the collective grievance, do you have to specify why you want this added? Ideally you would. You don't, strictly speaking, have to. A grievance, be it individual or collective, we are talking about collectives here, can be as dense or sparse as you want. So it can be like a 2-sentence grievance, or it can be quite long. I would normally recommend to keep it comprehensive, but not too long to take the piss, because like you want to make it as cutting and thorough as possible. So that could be, yeah. So you kind of you'd handpick the good points, if you like. So yes, I would recommend you explain why. But again, strictly speaking, it doesn't have to. Yeah. Then when the trade dispute has arisen, right? What you do is you contact, again, let's say you're a member of the Independent Workers Union, you contact me, right? And then what we do is we get the ball rolling for a secret ballot if all the workers are in favour of that. Secret ballot goes out to all of you individually. You tick yes or no if you want to engage in industrial action. You send it back. Then we give the employer 7 days notice, and then the industrial action starts. Now it's worth pausing and thinking about what that industrial action would look like, right? I'm specifically saying industrial action and not strike, because oftentimes an all-out strike can actually be quite rare when it comes to industrial action. It can kind of be anything you want it to be, but obviously you want it to be disruptive to your employer, right? A strike is by nature the most disruptive thing you could do to your employer. You're withdrawing your labour, right? So the work that you're employed to do isn't getting done, so it hits your employer's pocket, right? The industrial action can manifest, though, in you all just refusing to handle Israeli goods. That can be the industrial action as well, right? So that doesn't have to be specified to your employer beforehand, but on the day of it, they'll very quickly find out what it is then, right? And the industrial action can go on then as long as you want, as long as the group of workers wants. Some group of workers take the approach that it could be like 1 day on, 1 day off, right? If that's to do with strikes or whatever. It could be for a full week, a full month. It could be whatever the workers want and agree amongst themselves, right? And then that is it, right? The purpose of the industrial action then is to get your employer to sit down, talk with you, and to agree that yes, this will be implemented in either your contract or the employee handbook, or it will be some way reflected in your terms and conditions of employment that you don't have to handle Israeli goods anymore if you don't want to. Right. Now, doing all of this by the book, by the Industrial Relations Act 1990, technically protects you, right? But as I said in the beginning, it is possible, and it has happened, that employers might be willing to take the financial hit and go to what's known as the Workplace Relations Commission if they just outright sack you, right? Which is why it's always better, right? While technically a collective, a group of workers, is 2 or more, so you could do this with just the 2 of you. It's a lot easier for an employer to sack you and take a financial hit than if it was 30 of you. They're not going to do that then. So the legal protection here afforded by the Act is obviously something that is it's helpful in the overall action that you're trying to accomplish, but it isn't a bulletproof vest. Your employer can still go after you, even if you do everything by the book, right? And I think that might be where if I'm correct, this might be the last one. I'll get you this in a second, but I think it might be worth thinking about this in quite a bit of detail here. In that, when you're unfairly dismissed, right? I'm going to take a brief detour here for a second. If you got sacked, even though you're covered under the Act, right? And you have to go down the route of the WRC or whatever, the Labour Court. The max that the employer has to do is pay a fine, pay you compensation, right? So if there's only a few of you, and the employer is big enough where they can take the financial hit, they might do that. But if there's a lot of you, oftentimes it doesn't matter how big they are then, because it would be a big enough blow in the whole scheme of things for them to do that. So it's much more likely that they would sit down and talk to you. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Okay. So yeah, this slide is just reiterating what I just said, right? So yeah, for when you have that trade dispute, you have to go through those steps that I just spoke about there. That's it, right? It might seem quite like I don't want to play it down that it's easy to engage in industrial action because it's not. The difficulty is in convincing your colleagues to A, join a union, and B, that this issue is worth taking struggle over, it's worth struggling for, right? That's the hard part. But the actual process of engaging in industrial action is deceptively simple, right? It has been, I think, conflated by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions that it is very difficult, and it isn't, right? If you have a good union that's behind you and good officials that will fight your corner to the end, then it's actually something that's quite straightforward. It's something that, for most of the time, your union is taken care of while you're doing the actual good industrial action, the good work on the ground. Yeah, I think I'll probably stop talking there and we'll open it up to discussion or questions or comments. Yeah, thank you.
Are there any questions from online?
Hi, so I don't know how to put your hand up on this thing. So I've just got two questions. I'm Martin from BDS Belfast. One is this just in the 26 counties or does it apply to the six as well? And another one too would be, say the group of workers were in a union, say for example, Unite, and they get together and they do this and they collectively refuse get to the issue where you know where the cans they've went through the procedure and a union doesn't back them, can they still go ahead even if the union's saying we're not backing you on this?
They're great questions. So for the first one, as far as I'm aware, this act only applies to the 26 counties. I don't know if it applies to the six counties. So everything that I've just said is with the caveat that you are operating in the 26 counties jurisdiction. I could be wrong with that, but I am pretty sure that is the case. With the second, unfortunately, to be short about it, yes, normally your union, not normally, always your union has to back you. And how this is done at a bureaucratic level is that the union would have to agree to the industrial action, normally at a National Executive Committee meeting. And if they don't back you, then they will not hold the secret ballot for you, because it is them who has to orchestrate the secret ballot. So if the union doesn't back you and you continue with the industrial action, it's technically unofficial industrial action then. And it's not to say that like you can't take unofficial industrial action. It's more that if you do, you open yourself up to litigation by your employer. And also, well, that's the main thing, is that you're opening yourself up to litigation. So if you are to do it, it's not impossible. If you are to engage in some form of unofficial industrial action, you would want to get some form of guarantee from your employer that you won't be, that when you return to work, let's say you go on strike, that you won't be penalized for it. You being the collective. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Great, that's great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Joining us from Belfast.
Thanks.
If your colleagues are in different unions, can you still initiate a dispute?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can, but it becomes very, very messy when it comes to actually engaging in industrial action then.
Can you stop sharing your slides?
Oh, I can, of course, yeah. I can, of course.
See you.
No bother. So, yeah, that's let me reformulate my thoughts there.
Sorry.
No bother. So the trade dispute arises from a collective of workers, right? But when it comes to actually engaging in the industrial action, and when it comes to formalizing the secret ballot and what the industrial action will look like, and your union putting the employer on notice, if it's multiple different unions in the same workplace, that can be quite messy with overlap, right? So the recommendation would be, obviously, ideally, you would all be in the same union, right? That also makes it so that you are there's no cross wires, and it is clear what's going on. So to answer the question again, yes, the trade dispute can arise if you're in different unions. However, the actual practicalities of engaging in industrial action, if that's the case, would make it unadvisable, in my opinion, unless there was exceptionally good communication between the unions. And that can be not the case sometimes. Yeah.
Just on that, to follow up on that, normally in big places of employment where there are multiple unions, you would have they'd be operating together,
Yeah.
more or less in a situation like that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. I mean, in order for it to go ahead, the workers themselves would obviously have to agree across the unions what the dispute is about, what the trade dispute is. And oftentimes, if there's a group of workers that are in a separate union to another group of workers, let's say if we were to take, let's say, the HSE, for example, normally what that means is there's one group of workers, Group A, doing job A, and then another group of workers, Group B, doing job B. So it can be the case, not always, but it can be the case that there might be a difficulty in finding commonality for a trade dispute. However, that's not always the case. And there have, of course, been multiple examples of that not being the case. I suppose I'm just answering from a point of practicality and caution, in that if you are in a workplace and there are multiple different unions represented, you would have to navigate those waters carefully. And oftentimes, the best way of doing this would be to talk to your shop steward and then talk to your union official as well. Yeah.
It's all not connected to the Occupied Territories Bill, right? Because it's not enacted yet or implemented yet, so we can also boycott Israeli services or with vice versa, refuse to handle goods that are shipped to Israel as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, how I would look at it is, because it's the workers submitting the grievance, the collective grievance, they can make it about whatever they want, right? So it does not have to be the case that you just want a stipulation that you don't have to handle Israeli goods. It can be as, if you want, minute as you want, right? So it can be also about Israeli services. It can be about it can be as detailed as you'd like, which goes back then to Maya's question that, like, you can then give your reasons for it too, you know. And that's what's very important. So which is a great point, is that it's the workers making the grievance. The trade dispute arises from their grievance, right? So the workers make it about whatever they want, right? But it's very important that it's not just a flat out refusal, and then that's it. It's that you're specifically asking for your terms and conditions of employment to reflect this refusal, right? Because ultimately, again, because we're dealing with industrial relations, right, and how you deal with your employer, it has to reflect your working conditions. That's what the act is all about. Yeah.
Would you be able to provide like an example of a well-written grievancey thing?
Yeah, like a template.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like not now. I wouldn't have it to hand.
No.
But yeah, I can find one and share one. Yeah.
Yeah.
There would often be there'd be a template that I would have. Because again, it can be as detailed or as sparse as you want. And oftentimes there's a difficulty with templates then, though, in that because each grievance and each dispute is so specific to a workplace, often there's quite a lot that needs to be chopped and changed. But yeah,
maybe just like this, like what are the components of a good one? You know, like
yeah. I mean, in brief, even without providing a template now, I can just say that all you need to do is say, we, the undersigned, want this implemented. You'd say what it is, right? You give your reasons why, and that would be it.
Yeah.
And then again, obviously, like, you go into as much detail as you want. But what it is in practice is the workers are highlighting an issue that they have with their terms and conditions of employment. They want this changed. and then you're saying to management, please, sir, change it. That's what you're doing.
Okay.
Right? And then when they say no, that's the trade dispute.
Yeah.
Yes.
In theory, when you're putting in that grievance, you wouldn't have to sign, as in the specific involved workers, would you? Or could you get your trade union rep to write the letter and have that written in?
You could, right? So you can do that. However, what we found in practice is that when a collective grievance is individually signed by each worker, it gives it a lot more weight in the sense that an employer can receive an employer can receive the grievance, right, or the letter from the union official, which states that we represent 30 workers in the place of employment, right? But I imagine in the employer's head, there's probably a doubt that that's true, right? Because obviously, if you're a member of a trade union, you don't have to tell your employer, right? They only find out when you engage in industrial action. So you don't have to sign the collective grievance, but it makes it a lot more powerful, in my opinion, if you do. And of course, your union official can submit it on your behalf. But again, I think it looks and is industrially better if the workers hand it themselves, rap on management's door and hand it. That's just from my perspective. I'm open to disagreement there, but yeah.
Unlikely as it may be, this also allows for the employer to actually reach out to the employees and engage with them, right?
Yeah, I mean, like the idea, I suppose that I mean I think this is how HR personnel imagine the work world going, is that you knock on the door of the manager and the manager invites you in and you sit down and you have a lovely chat about your disagreements and then you shake hands at the end and there's some compromise that's come to. But as we all know in practice, that doesn't happen at all, right? Oftentimes there's a lot of ignoring. What you'll find when you do get involved in engaging in industrial action is that a lot of what you send to your employer and often HR and what the union sends to the same personnel, oftentimes it's ignored, right? Because I think what they're hoping is that it'll just go away. Yeah. There's a question behind that. Hello. You? Yeah.
What about me?
Yeah.
On the issue of handling Israeli goods, would you have a particular audience, or I guess target worker in mind? Like, in other words, do you think that this could be a good, useful issue to engage workers in industrial action, or even to get them unionized? Or do you think there's better ways about doing that, and that this is better reserved for already long unionized or seasoned workers who also tend to be somewhat politically educated anyway?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have a definitive answer for you there, right? But what I would always say is, you can't make workers care about something. You can't make anyone care about anything. Someone has to care about something themselves, right? So if you and your colleagues deeply, care about the issue, or if you deeply care about the issue and your colleagues don't yet, your job, and this is the hard part, right? So the simple part is doing all the is fighting by the legislation. The hard part, the real boots on the ground grunt work, is convincing your colleagues that they should care about this, right? Not only that they should care, that they should join a union, and then that they should also take industrial action over it. That's the hard graft of it all. And that's open to everybody. It does not have to be a long unionized workplace. In fact, oftentimes the best results can be from the opposite of ununionized workplaces where everybody is individually fed up and fucked off with their employer, but they all think that it's just their issue, right? But then when you start talking to your colleagues, you all realize you have the same issues, right? And then rather than just moaning about it, the best thing to do is to take action. Yeah.
Like, don't you think, or in your opinion, like say if a group of workers that was heavily involved with the Palestine movement, which there are many, like there are many different groups, that in this moment because it's not just a normal trade dispute that we're talking about, right? Like we're in the middle of a genocide.
Yeah.
It is we see now more and more coverage in the news, like the Occupied Territories Bill is being talked at like governmental level. There's 73% support now for the Occupied Territories Bill in the general population.
Yeah.
And that, like, in your opinion, like the support, like having the backing of not just a union, but also the movement, and the movement being aware of any like potential trade dispute happening in an industry, or like that would also give weight to those workers' ability to get positive results from their employer.
Yeah, I mean, like they both go hand in hand with each other. Like, I mean, I've presented something that's very formulaic, right? But I've done that intentionally because, I mean, ultimately what this is another avenue that you can go about, right? To properly demonstrate solidarity, right? It's another concrete avenue that you can do in your workplace, right? It's effectively the only way you can do it in your workplace, or at least potentially achieve that, right? Because if you try to do this, for example, if you try to do this just yourself and not collective, you would write your own grievance, you would hand it to management, they would ignore you, and that's it. That's where it stops. Right? You have no recourse. And you obviously you want to go further, right? And this is the avenue how to do it, right? If this is what you want to do and what you truly care about, you have to do it with your colleagues collectively together, right? You can't do it yourself. And then, like, cementing your point then, Christina, it isn't just you and your colleagues. It's the wider solidarity movement in Ireland then that will have your back, like.
Yeah.
Because you're not just going to do it and say nothing to no one about it. Do you know what I mean? You will have the backing of everybody else then as well. Do you know what I mean? And that can be publicized.
Yeah.
And that can be talked about. And then pressure can be put on the employer, not just by their workers, but by the general public.
And because there are several unions now that have passed like BDS, like emotions, or there's several who have done it. So that work by a lot of workers has been done to lay that groundwork.
Absolutely.
That like a group of workers could take advantage of, like spring off that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't find a way to raise my hand to speak from online, but a point worth making is, while recognizing the need to work in the here and now, the reality is that the Industrial Relations Act here in Ireland is very repressive and is formulated to scare and intimidate workers taking action outside of normal channels. Actions like the Dunstores workers against apartheid back in the day were seen as harming industrial peace and Ireland's image as a business-friendly country. So working to undermine the act is also a vital part of the work we should do. Very well said, Kevin. Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't think I have any further comment on that. I would agree. But at the same time, while the act is very limiting, it's not completely debilitating. So work can still be done properly, while I suppose you work in parallel trying to dismantle that structure that enables it in the first place. Do you know?
There's just another comment here from Sarah. There's a great book called Complaint by Sarah Ahmed. It looks into the issues of being ignored, told no, made jump through hoops by organisations. It's mainly about disputes with universities, but it's still a very good read for anyone interested in how organisations can attempt to wear people down. And I guess that's do you have any other recommendations yourself for further reading? Do you have a podcast, Jamie?
Do I have a podcast?
Yeah. Oh, your colleague has a TikTok, the union man.
That's true. For further reading, I am blanking. But my colleague Alex, he's based up in Dublin. He has a fantastic TikTok that's doing the rounds. I think it's called Union Man Ireland.
Union Man of Ireland, yeah.
Yeah, and he breaks down industrial issues into bite-sized snippets. Much like I've hopefully done today.
Yeah.
The website has loads of resources.
That's true.
Oh.
Union.ie is the best URL imaginable. We have a resources section that we've kind of curated over the last year and a half about some of our topics.
Is there more comments from online?
What I would say to answer or to finish while waiting for other comments is that if this is something that you want to do, right, and you want to properly get stuck into industrial action, I can promise you that we will do it for you, and we'll back you to the hill. I don't think you get that guarantee with any other union.
Paid hashtag paid promotion. No,
Not sponsored.
not sponsored. Okay. I think that's. Oh, Joe.
Can I just make a comment? Just coming back to the question you asked, with the support from the movement as well, and going back to the Dunstore strike. There was the Irish anti-apartheid movement set up Dunstore's support groups, and I know the one here in Cork we picketed. It was 3 Dunstores at the time in the city centre, and each Saturday we went to one to the ground, which resulted those shops emptied.
Yeah.
You know, we big pickets outside them, so that obviously helped people up in Henry Street, as well as having a support group in Henry Street. They had mass pickets there every Saturday, so did the movement and the workers together.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we got so excited about this when we heard about it is because like we've been on the streets, and anyone who's been doing BDS leafleting or talking to people or normal like person on the street and consumer knows how difficult it is to have those conversations. It's getting a bit easier now, but still people are largely not like they don't want to engage. You know, there is a lack of like a workers movement in like at an industrial level that's missing from the equation that was definitely there in the anti-apartheid movement. So we hope that today this will give people the fodder that they need, the tools that they need in order to take it further and step it up a notch. We're always talking about escalating. I think this is another excellent tool in that process. So I'd like to thank Jamie and the Independent Workers Union and for you all for coming online. We have people from Belfast, yay, and from all over the country. I don't know where it's not. I think Michelle and Mary are here from Waterford. So thank you all for joining online. We'll post this. We'll post this on our YouTube channel and the recording, and it'll be available for you to share with your members. And I'll share the resources that send the link that Jamie was talking about as well. So thank you very much for coming.
Thanks a million. It's really
Well done,
informative.
thank you.
Greetings from Galway. Hi.
Yeah, there's 2 at least from Galway.
Hello from Galway. Hello Galway. Delighted to see you. From Galway. Thank you. Really good talk.